Costume Rendering Basics series, fabrics, take 1. And we're starting today specifically. Hi, mommies. Here. Say hi. Say hi. No? Okay. Don't look at me like that. Let's try that again. Oh, got something in my eye. Okay, Costume Rendering Basics Fabric Series Take 6. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be continuing our Costume Basics rendering series, and today we're going to start with fabrics. We're only going to do one this time because it's a challenging fabric. It's a fabric that a lot of you have asked me for, and that is rendering metallics. This is something I struggled with before I picked up markers for costume rendering, and I'm happy to show you my method for doing this pretty easily. So let's move on to rendering some shiny metallic objects. Alright, like I said in the intro, today we're rendering metallics. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to go in and find all of your highlights, i.e. where the light is hitting the object. And what I do is I just draw little amorphous shapes kind of exactly where it would refract light. I'm doing this really lightly with just a number 2 pencil, and the reason for that is because it's almost impossible to erase pencil lines under marker. But if you go in dark enough with marker, it'll disguise the edge. The next step is I kind of outline these with a little bit of Deco Yellow. We're doing gold here today, so I'm going to use all yellow tone markers, but you can pretty much wash, rinse, and repeat with grays and like light blues for silver and any other metal color you want to try. Here you can see more clearly, I'm just going around and enclosing all of those highlights around with this Deco Yellow. This is our closest to highlight color. The next step is a little bit back to basics with our underpainting. I'm actually going in and adding in a little bit of gray lavender or violet mist to this rendering, and what that does is it's the counter color to yellow, so it just helps deepen the tone of the yellow that we're using and gray it out a little bit. Next, I'm coming in with Jasmine, which is going to be like our medium tone of yellow. And I'm going around all of the spaces where the highlights are not, just to go ahead and overall tone the piece in the yellow colorway. So now we move into the fun part, deepening the lowlights of the piece. So what I'm going in with now is the ShinHan twin tip brush pen, and it's in the color Walnut. And what I'm doing is I'm going into the very deep dark places, because the trick with metallics is you want to have a high highlight and a low light, which means you want to really bump the contrast. And similar to rendering leather, you don't want a lot of blending between your medium tones, highlights, and darks. You actually want them to exist very closely together. The best way you can view this is find a round metallic object and see what it does in light. You'll notice the darks are very dark right up against the highlight colors. Lastly, in our highlight section, I'm going in with Spanish Orange, which is one of my favorite yellows. It has a slight orange tint to it. It's very similar to like a saffron kind of dye. And what I'm doing here with that is I'm just deepening that kind of brassy color of the gold. The next step is to tone all this back down, and the best color I've found for this is the ShinHan Touch dual tip marker in brown gray. It's not brown, nor is it gray. It's actually a very yellow color, but it's a muted yellow color. So it's going to tone down that saffron gold that we put in, but still allow it to play through. It's a really important step if you want it to look like metal. I decided to add in a little bit of sky blue light just to continue to pump the underpainting and just dull down the yellowness of the gold. Alright, like I was talking about with the lowlights, you want them right up against those highlights. I know it seems weird, but it's truly the way to make a reflective metal surface. For this bodice itself, I'm imagining it to look like armor, and like gold-plated armor. But it'll probably be made out of... Oh my god, Julianne Moore. This cat does not cooperate. She just wants to be where the action is. Come on. Let's move you out of here. Alright, like I was saying, this is probably going to be made out of a glazed or gilded leather or potentially a vinyl that's metallic. So, what I'm doing now is I'm adding in the Prismacolor marker Sienna Brown with the fine end point, just to give those lowlights an even darker thing. I'm actually going to come in with a little bit of cocoa bean too, because as I said, a curved metallic surface always has some like almost black spots in them. And those are actually not lowlights, they're more of reflections of the black in the room. The cocoa bean marker is so great for this because it's a rich, deep brown that reads almost black, but you can feather it out with your other markers and it reads a little bit brown. It does a full transitional shift when you feather it out. This is why I love it for gold. I'm coming back in with the ShinHan Touch dual tip markers in Walnut. This is just the darkest of the goldish tones that I have from them, and I'm just popping this into all of the places where we've established the shadows to just blend down into that Spanish orange, brown-gray mix. This overlay process of this last color, Walnut, is pretty much it. The jacket's done. You want it to feel a little splotchy. That's what gives you that highlight to lowlight quick shift that happens with metallics. Alright, I'm going to move down onto the pumpkin breeches now. Also, the fact that they're called pumpkin breeches is absolutely ridiculous. The Elizabethan and Tudor time periods, as far as pants go, my absolute favorite. I want these to read as though they're a metallic taffeta. It would probably be what you would make it from. You wouldn't make these from leather. They kind of want to have a little bit of volume and lift. So taffeta, something that has a little bit more support to itself rather than a heavy leather, is kind of the way to go. I'm kind of following the exact same steps that I followed with this jacket, but I'm taking out that Spanish orange color. And the reason for that is I want two separate tones of gold. I want these pumpkin breeches to read a little bit more muted than the gold breastplate jacket that she's wearing. And yes, I know it's not called a jacket, it's called a doublet, but it doesn't have sleeves, so I'm just making this up on the fly. For the lowlights on the panes of the pumpkin breeches, I'm using bronze instead of, I believe it was the Sienna Brown and the cocoa bean. I'm probably going to go in with the cocoa bean, but the bronze is going to give us a little bit more of a muted gold tone. It's a really, really dark yellow ochre kind of color. It's great for this. Just using that same ShinHan walnut to reinforce the dark areas. And then what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to go over the highlights with that brown gray color that I love so much from the ShinHan series. And I'm just going to actually go over the highlights. What this will do is lessen the perceived shine of the taffeta, similar to how it would react next to a metallic leather. The darks definitely weren't reading dark enough, so I went back in with cocoa bean, and I'm probably going to do a wash of a couple of other colors over this just to kind of blend them together. I don't want the highlights and lowlights to read as far apart in value as they do on the doublet, and the reason for that is I want it to really read like silk taffeta, which has just a more matte sheen than a shiny leather. Let's listen to that fun royalty-free YouTube music while I finish this off. All right, next up on the docket is the underpants to the pumpkin hose. So traditionally, these pumpkin breeches were built with panes that would allow then an underpant to show through. The underpant was blousy and huge, and oftentimes in Germany specifically, they would actually pull it through the panes and it would look really, really silly. So I'm not doing that this time. I'm adding in grays. I'm adding in cool gray, 40, and then I'm going back in for the lowlights with cool gray 50, and I'm going to top all of this off with violet mist. I want them to have a slight purple undertone because purple is the contrast to gold. It's the exact opposite color on the color wheel if you remember your color theory classes from college or even grade school. Oh, don't think I wasn't going to talk about the phallus in the room. So this codpiece, that's what it's called, a codpiece. You may know it from films like Clockwork Orange. They all wore codpieces. Typically in theater, we draw them in a more genteel way, just kind of like a padded bulge. But in actual history, they were often very phallic in nature, sometimes very large. I love them, I mean, obviously, but they do read really comical, so we kind of tend as theater designers to reserve them for the more comedic characters in a Shakespearean play, if we choose to use them at all. Because in actuality, they just look like a penis. The last two steps on this rendering are her hose and her shoes. And I'm just treating the hose as I would any other skin tone because it's so close to the leg and I want it to read very tight. So I'm just going in and treating it as though it's just her skin and using my color theory. So I'm using sky blue light, grayed lavender, and then I'm going to go over top of it with the same color I used of the underpants of the pumpkin hose, that violet mist. And you'll see how crazy different it looks over just a blue and a grayed lavender versus the cool gray 40 and cool gray 50. It reads a lot warmer, doesn't it? Sadly, the shoes are out of the shot, but all I did was just do a darker version of the gold from the bodice slash doublet and the pumpkin breeches. I just went in with darker markers. The last and final step to any costume rendering of fabric is I go back in with a little bit of a number 2 pencil and just clean up the edges. And sometimes, like I mentioned in the skin tone episode and the hair and makeup episode, I go back in with a colored pencil as well. There she is, she's done. Thanks for watching today, and if you'd like to see more of this series or more costume-related content, go ahead and click that subscribe button, go ahead and like this, and while you're there, go ahead and check out some of that back catalog of costume renderings. Let me know if you want to see anything more specific or if there are any more questions about rendering metallic fabrics. Go ahead and leave a comment down below. I'll see you next week with the continuation of this series. We'll be rendering the dreaded patent leather and, as a bonus, velvet. And on top of all of that, it's going to be rendered in black. So it'll be nice and witchy and honestly not as challenging as it sounds. So I'll see you next week. Bye.